Greetings, everyone. You are listening to the voice of Hans Wiersma. I am the professor who was originally scheduled to teach this class and am no longer doing so. However, your present professor, Megan Torgerson, has graciously requested my introduction to the class as I originally conceived it. So that's what you're getting here. There's a picture of me from my faculty page in case you don't know what I look like, but really your main question might be, where are you this term? What are you up to? The short answer is I'm on study leave for the entire school year and I am working on a book project. The title of the book, working title at least, is 1520, and I'm going to be telling the story January to December 1520 of the break between Martin Luther and the Roman Catholic Church. That's the story that I'll be working on, and I'll be working on that story at the Catholic University in the city of Louvain in Belgium. This is a picture of the old medieval university, so I'll be spending some time there, as well as in the Stella Artois brewery, which is in the same city. But back to the title of the course and my little meditation on it, Church, past, present, future, So here are my thoughts. Let me give you a little background of my interest in the subject of church, past, present, future. I've been part of churches my entire life. The picture you're looking at is a picture of my home congregation in Palo Alto, California, where I was born and raised and involved in youth group. After college, a little bit into my 20s, I went to seminary to study to become a pastor. And the first church I served was in The Hague in the Netherlands. Served there for 3 years. We then moved to California, where I served for 4 years at a Lutheran church south of Sacramento. And then finally in 1998, we came back to Minnesota, where I served a church in Eden Prairie. Some of you know Eden Prairie. So you can see I have more than just an academic interest in the subject. As a former leader of churches, as someone who still participates actively in church life, I've got a vested interest in the subject and a deep curiosity about it. And so I like to take the long view. As a historian especially, I like to start at the beginning. So as I discuss what does this mean, church past, present, future, we're going to start in the past at the very beginning. You got to remember that the Christian movement, which is about 2,000 years old now, begins with the execution of its leader, Jesus of Nazareth. So I'm going to show you a picture of that execution. So a little content advisory here for you. You're looking at an image from the crucifixion scene, the very long crucifixion scene from Mel Gibson's film, The Passion of the Christ. Film it's about 16 years old now, I think. It really isn't my kind of Jesus movie, a little bit too much blood and gore for me, but this image at least gets the point across that Christianity, at the start at least, is a religion based upon and built around the teachings of a failed Messiah, somebody who was caught by the occupying Romans and then executed in a very public and brutal way outside of the city walls of Jerusalem, somewhere around the year 30 AD. If Jesus had just been crucified, that would have been the end of the story, but his earliest followers reported seeing him alive. That is, he was escaped from the grave. This is a pretty cool image of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which has been built over a church, which was built over a tomb believed to be the empty tomb of Jesus. So it's not just a crucified man that Christians worship, it's a man that somehow after being crucified, he was seen alive again. But history is full of people who have died and then been spotted alive again. I'm thinking of Elvis Presley, I'm thinking of Tupac Shakur. Just because you die and someone sees you alive afterwards doesn't necessarily explain why you would turn into a worldwide religion, one that grows from about 120 people to 2 billion people in the span of 2,000 years. One explanation, possibly, for the phenomenon of Christianity, how it started so small and ended up so large, is that God is behind it. You're looking at an image by El Greco. This is painted in around the year 1600. Of the event Christians call Pentecost, when the power of God's Spirit came and rested on the original followers of Jesus, thereby empowering them to represent, as it were, the name and the person and the work of Jesus, and to then establish congregations, little groups around the Mediterranean that became Jesus followers. Little bit of a close-up of that image. You can see the Holy Spirit imaged as a dove above the group of original followers. And if you read the New Testament book of Acts, chapters 2, you'll see this Pentecost event described, the empowering of the original Jesus followers to begin the movement and to spread the movement. Zooming in a bit more, I like this image because at the center of it are women. And I think we forget sometimes that women were as much a part of the original movement as men. It kind of became a bit of a male-dominated thing over the centuries. This painting shows Mary Magdalene there at the heart, as well as an image of a couple other women, remembering that this is an inclusive movement for men and women, for all. This is an image of the conversion of Saul of Tarsus, a man who originally opposed the Christian movement, but then became a member of the movement himself, thanks to a dramatic conversion experience while he was traveling the road to Damascus. So Paul became not only a follower of Jesus, but he became probably the one who was mostly instrumental in spreading Christianity to non-Jewish regions around the Mediterranean world. So Christianity spread so that by about the middle of the first century, there were Christian communities in what's today Turkey, in what's today Egypt, in what's today Tunisia, and in what is today Italy. So Christianity fairly quickly came to have little congregations spread all over the Mediterranean world, also known as the Roman Empire. As Christianity spread throughout the empire, the Christians became famous for refusing to bow down to the emperor. They would only bow down, as it were, to Jesus, and so they were increasingly persecuted. This is an image of two early martyrs, that is, two people who gave witness to Jesus with their lives. Their names are Perpetua, there on the left, and Perpetua's servant, Felicity or Felicitas, there on the right. One of the most remembered martyrs from the early church movement. They were killed because they refused to bow down to the emperor and refused to renounce Jesus, somewhere around the year 200. Christianity became full of these martyrs, and they were written about and remembered and honored. Their graves often became shrines, which then later became larger buildings, which then even later became cathedrals. But you have to remember that much of Christianity's early appeal was fueled by the dramatic stories of these brave martyrs. Here's another image illustrating the martyrdom of Perpetua and Felicitas. This image comes from a book called John Fox's Book of Martyrs, an account of the brave souls who stood up for Jesus, as it were, and stood against the man, that is, the Roman Empire. Tertullian, the man who was responsible for publicizing the story of Perpetua and Felicitas, called the blood of the martyrs seed. That is, the blood of the martyrs was seed for the growth of Christianity. And I think as you look at the phenomenal growth of Christianity, despite the way it was massively persecuted in the first 300 years of its existence, a good argument can be made that it would not have grown were it not for these inspiring stories of these inspired individuals called martyrs. So for the first 300 years of the Christian movement, the Roman emperors and the Roman government, generally speaking, did not treat Christians very kindly. All of that changed, however, in the year 310, when an emperor named Constantine turned the tables, as it were, and made Christianity not only a legal religion in the empire, but a favored religion. Here's a close-up of the image you're looking at. It's from a painting by Raphael, the famous medieval Renaissance painter, of the vision of Constantine. And as the story goes, Constantine was outside of Rome, about to engage in a decisive battle for ultimate power over the Roman Empire. And as his men camped outside at night, Constantine saw in a dream or in a vision an image of the cross. And then he heard a voice, and the voice said, "In hoc signo vinces," which means, "In this sign conquer." And so the story goes, Constantine had his soldiers paint crosses on their shields, and then they went in, marched over the bridge of the Tiber River, and conquered Rome. So Constantine credited Jesus with the military victory. So Christianity goes from being a persecuted religion to being a tolerated and legal religion. So the persecutions end, and Christianity enters a new phase, a phase with political backing. The political backing of Christianity goes from tolerated religion under Constantine to, a few emperors later, the only legal religion under Theodosius. So in 381 AD, the Roman emperor declares that all of the other gods and goddesses and worship traditions in Rome are no longer legal, and Christianity is the only legal religion of the empire. Pretty dramatic swing when you think about it. So before Constantine and Theodosius, Christianity was a force to be reckoned with, in that it was a compelling movement that touched people's hearts and minds and convinced them that Jesus was real and Jesus was worth following. After Constantine and Theodosius, it's a force to be reckoned with in a different way. It's a force with political and military clout behind it. So it's not so much your heart is moved or your mind has changed and you become a follower of Jesus. It's because you are compelled to be a Christian, because it's really the only legal option in the empire. So Christianity spreads because it has the power of the state behind it, and everyone, in a sense, becomes baptized Christians, whether they like it or not, in a way. So this escalates into Christianity spread and then encounter with another religious movement that began in the 7th century, known as Islam. That encounter and that conflict came to a head in the Crusades, which began in the year 1099 and continued for about 150 years thereafter. So Christianity becomes something quite different than it was at the beginning. This massive political, geographical entity that is not below taking up arms and fighting for territory against anyone who would compete for the territory. The image you saw in the previous slide is from the film Kingdom of Heaven, starring the very good-looking Orlando Bloom. This image is from another film from the year 2000 called Luther, starring the very good-looking Joe Fine. So about 300 years after the Crusades, Christianity, the Christian movement, was shaken by a movement called the Reformation, led by a guy named Martin Luther. Some of you may have heard of him. So Luther shakes up Christianity, and Christianity, beginning in the year 1550, say, begins to subdivide and subdivide and subdivide under the label of Protestant. Which brings us to today. Today you've got generally 3 kinds of Christians: Roman Catholic Christians, Eastern Orthodox Christians, and the kind of Christian that many of you will be probably most familiar with is Protestant Christian. So let's take a step back and look at the numbers. You can see that worldwide there's almost 1/3, or about 2.3 billion people, are Christian, and then the next biggest group, I'd put this at about 2 million actually to round it off, is Islam, and then followed by those who would be unaffiliated, that is, they would describe themselves as secular or non-religious or even atheist. And then you can see much smaller percentages of worldwide population belong to these faiths. So Christianity is still the dominant religious faith in its many, many manifestations on the planet presently. And then in terms of the different Christian groups within Christianity, about half of all Christians, you can see, somehow fall under the hierarchy of the Pope in Rome, the Roman Catholic Church. And then if you were to put all the Protestants together into one group, you can see that they are about 2/3 of the remainder of the Christians on the planet. But Protestants include Lutherans Anglicans, Presbyterians, Assemblies of God, non-denominational, Baptists. At one point, a man did some research to see how many different Protestant groups there were, independently operating Protestant groups, big and small, and he came up with 30,000 different autonomous groups. Some big, like the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, that has about 4 million members now, and some very, very little. Worldwide, you can see that there's about 800 million Christians in North, Central, and South America. The next biggest group, just barely, is Europe. A word about Europe in just a second, special case. In sub-Saharan Africa, you've got almost 500 million Christians, and in Asia and the Pacific territories, including Australia, you've got about 300 million Christians. Ironically, a very small number of Christians in the area that gave birth to Christianity, the Middle East. Most of the people in the Middle East identify as Muslim. Back to Europe. You see this is a pretty large number, 500 million people or more. However, many of those people would be counted as Christians because they were baptized Christian as part of the state church in many of the Northern European countries. But you ask some of the people who are numbered in this number today, as well as who are numbered in this number today especially, are you still a Christian? And they would probably say, no, not really. So as we look at the church presently, and we see some interesting trends, more about those trends in a sec, but in this country at least, we can at least say that Christian churches can be found in many different shapes and sizes. Here's one such church. This is a Lutheran church in South St. Paul called Augustana Lutheran Church. And you can see it's kind of doing pretty good. The pews are decently full, and the sun is out, and people seem to be into what is happening at this church. Well, I thought I'd zoom in a little to see what was going on here in this congregation, but you can see it's not a very high resolution photo. Nevertheless, you can see there's a man here at the pulpit, probably giving a sermon, and behind the man, there's a figure. This could be actually your professor, Megan Torgerson. You'll have to ask her. In any case, the point is that this is a congregation in the middle of America doing what congregations do, gathering together, hearing the word of God, singing praises, and learning what it is to be a follower of Jesus. Something that is not without its challenges, whether you're an individual Jesus follower or a group of Jesus followers meeting together in a church. So one of the biggest phenomena in Christianity is the so-called megachurch. This is an image of the worship service on a Sunday morning of the largest church in the USA in Houston, Texas, called Lakewood Church. The pastor of Lakewood Church is this guy preaching down here. His name is Joel Osteen. Of course, you can see a little bit what he looks like because he's on the large screen TVs there at the front. This is a church that might be labeled non-denominational or Pentecostal or even Word of Faith. And this is a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that presently affects Christianity. Does it affect Christianity for the better or worse to have groups of Jesus followers gathered together in spaces of this size? So as we think about the future of Christianity, there are some trends to look at. One of them, of course, is the trend of the megachurch. More and more Christians are gathering in these big, big mall-like churches. At the same time, second trend, the number of Christians gathering in smaller churches is going down. So the smaller churches are getting smaller. And then the third trend to look at is that overall, people are not going to church as much as they used to. In some parts of the country, called nun zones, you have people staying away from churches in droves. You know, the Pacific Northwest, the Northeast, there are lots and lots of people not going to church or any religious place at all. So the country, the United States, is getting less and less religious, even as Christian churches themselves are tending more and more to get bigger and bigger, while the smaller churches get smaller and smaller. That's a trend that bodes in a certain way for the future. So let's look at these religious nuns a little bit more closely. We have in 2014, we had almost 23% of the population said, I'm not religious. That number is up to 25% today. So who are these nones? Are they all atheists? No, not really. You can see that today, about 7% of the population of the United States says, I'm atheist or agnostic. Agnostic meaning I'm not sure if there's a God or not. But then about twice that many might believe in God, probably do believe in God and even Jesus, but do not identify with a particular Christian church or group. One thing we know for sure is that the trend toward more and more non-religious people in the United States is going to increase. Why? Because the group that tends to be more religious, silent generation and baby boomers, they're going to die off. And the groups that tend to be less religious or non-religious, they're the younger groups. And of course, most of the non-religious, or the group with the largest percentage of non-religious, are the younger millennials. More than 1/3 of people born between 1990 and 1996, so some of you perhaps, do not identify as religious and will not be attending church anytime soon. So congregations are going to have to deal with a shrinking pool of people who are Christian. What's going to happen? What's going to become of churches? Are people going to close their doors? Are they going to merge together to form a more unified alliance? These are the questions we want to ask as we consider the future of Christianity, especially in the United States. So wither the churches, it's a pun. One could say that the church is withering in the US as it is elsewhere on the globe. But in fact, if you look at Christianity globally, it's doing quite well in the global south. South America, sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and India, Christian churches are vibrant and growing. But it's in the global north, especially in the US, and for a long time already in Europe, where Christianity is in a way withering. So we ask the question, and we'll leave it at that: wither the churches. That is, where are they headed, especially in this country? So thank you for listening. Have a great semester.